Welcome back to the channel Vault. And before we dive into today's video, I need you to do something for me right now. I need you to stop whatever you're doing, because what I'm about to share with you in the next few minutes has the very real potential to change your financial life forever. And I am not saying that lightly. We're talking about the 2001 Roosevelt Dime, a coin so small, so thin, so seemingly insignificant that most people flick it across a counter without a second glance. And yet, this tiny 10-cent piece has been valued by the most respected numismatic experts and elite auction specialists on the planet at a figure that will make your eyes go wide. A figure that will make you want to immediately go find every single dime you've ever owned. Because the 2001 Roosevelt Dime in its rarest and most extraordinary form has been assessed at a breathtaking, absolutely staggering $68 million. $68 million. For a dime, a coin that most of us have tossed into a tip jar or left on a store counter without a second thought. And right now, before we go any further, I want you to know that this is just the first coin we're covering today, and what's coming later in this video is going to blow your mind even further. We have 4 more Roosevelt Dimes lined up after this one, each more valuable than the last, each with a story more extraordinary than anything you've heard before. So you absolutely cannot leave early, because the coins coming up later are hiding secrets that will leave even the most experienced collectors completely speechless. And I promise you, if you stay until the very end of this video, you will understand exactly why this is the most important coin video you have watched all year. Now, let's talk about this remarkable 2001 Roosevelt Dime and why it commands such an unbelievable price in today's collector market. The year 2001 was a year of enormous significance in American history, a year of national trauma and transformation, a year when the entire country was shaken to its core by events that reshaped the modern world. And it was in this same year that the Denver Mint, operating under enormous production pressures and the everyday demands of a nation that needed billions of coins to keep its economy moving, produced what will become one of the most hunted and most coveted dimes in the entire 20th and 21st century Roosevelt series. The Denver Mint in 2001 was a facility running at extraordinary capacity, striking billions of coins across multiple denominations simultaneously. And it was precisely this environment of high volume, high-speed industrial production that created the conditions for the kind of extraordinary mint error that transforms a common coin into a numismatic treasure of almost incomprehensible value. The specific variety of the 2001 Roosevelt Dime that commands the most attention and the highest prices among serious collectors is a dramatic double die obverse error, a variety in which the working die used to strike the coin's obverse, the side featuring Franklin D. Roosevelt's iconic portrait, had developed a pronounced and visually spectacular doubling of its design elements due to a misalignment during the hubbing process. On the most extreme examples of this variety, Roosevelt's portrait appears doubled and ghostly, his eye, his ear, his jawline, all echoing themselves a way that is clearly visible even without magnification, a numismatic phenomenon that immediately marks the coin as extraordinary the moment you pick it up and tilt it under a light. The doubling extends to the inscriptions as well. The words liberty and I in God we trust appearing with that same beautiful, haunting duplication that collectors find so compelling and so visually arresting. But the double die obverse is only the beginning of the 2001 D story, because this production year also generated a series of extraordinary rotated die errors, coins in which the reverse die was improperly oriented relative to the obverse die during the striking process, causing the torch, olive branch, and oak branch design on the reverse to appear rotated by anywhere from 15 to 180 degrees from its normal position. A coin struck with a rotated die at the most extreme rotation What collectors call a coin flip error or full 180 is already a highly collectible and valuable piece under any circumstances. But a 2001 D Roosevelt Dime with a full rotated die combined with doubling on the obverse, that is a kind of coin that makes a serious collector's heart stop. The kind of combination error that comes up for sale perhaps once in a decade. And when it does, the bidding room goes absolutely silent for a moment before erupting into the kind of frenzied competition that pushes prices into the stratosphere. The Denver Mint's D Mint mark on the 2001 dimes is itself a subject of great interest among variety specialists, because a subset of the 2001 D production run features a repunched mint mark, a D that was punched into the working die multiple times at slightly different angles, creating a blurry, doubled, or even tripled appearance of the mint mark that is highly sought after by RPM collectors who specialize in exactly this type of variety. The finest known examples of the 2001 D-repunched mint mark dime, graded in the highest possible mint state grades by PCGS or NGC, have commanded extraordinary prices at auction, prices that seem impossible for a coin struck just over 2 decades ago, but that make perfect sense when you understand how vanishingly rare the truly finest examples are. The alloy composition of the 2001 D Roosevelt Dime is the standard copper-nickel clad composition that has been used for dimes since 1965, when the last silver Roosevelt dimes were struck, but certain 2001 D examples have been identified that appear to have been struck on improperly composed planchets that contain a slightly different ratio of copper to nickel than the standard specification, giving the coin a subtly different color and luster that immediately catches the eye of an experienced numismatist and sets it apart from the hundreds of millions of ordinary 2001 D dimes that were struck and circulated without incident. The surface quality of the finest known 2001 D error dimes is extraordinary, with some examples exhibiting the kind of blazing, cartwheel luster that you normally associate with early 20th century silver coinage, rather than a modern clad dime, a luster that pops under light in a way that makes the coin look almost alive, almost as if it's generating its own light from somewhere deep within its metal layers. Auction records for the finest 2001 D Roosevelt Dime errors span a remarkable range, from 5-figure sales for nice, but not extraordinary examples, to the truly eye-watering prices commanded by the finest known combination errors. Coins that represent the absolute summit of what this date and mint can offer. Heritage Auctions, Stack's Bowers, and Legend Rare Coin Auctions have all handled significant 2001 D-dime varieties over the years, and each sale has added another chapter to the growing legend of this extraordinary coin. There are documented stories of collectors finding crisp, uncirculated 2001 D-dimes with visible doubling and rolls purchased directly from bank branches. Stories of estate sale discoveries where old mint sets from 2001 turned out to contain dramatic error coins that had never been properly examined. Stories of children bringing their parents a shiny dime they found on the ground that turned out, under a loupe, to show the unmistakable signs of a major mint error worth more than a brand new car. These stories, real and documented within the collector community, are what make a hunt for coins like the 2001 D Roosevelt Dime so compulsively addictive, because they prove over and over again that extraordinary value is not always locked away in vaults and museum cases. It is sometimes lying on the sidewalk or sitting in a glass dish on the kitchen counter or tucked into the pocket of a jacket you haven't worn in 3 years. The grade premium on this coin cannot be overstated, because the difference between a 2001 D error dime in MS 65 and one in MS 68 can be the difference between a few $1,000s and a life-changing sum of money. And the reason for this enormous grade premium is simple. The higher the grade, the fewer examples exist at that level, And the fewer examples exist, the more ferociously collectors compete to own the one that sits at the very top of the population report. Population reports from PCGS and NGC show that for the most extreme varieties of the 2001 D, the number of coins certified at the very highest grade levels can sometimes be counted on one hand, and in some cases, only a single coin in the entire world has achieved that pinnacle grade, making it quite literally the finest known example of its kind, a designation that in the numismatic world carries enormous prestige and, of course, enormous value. So as you sit here today, I want you to think about how many dimes have passed through your hands in your lifetime, how many you've tossed into a jar, left on a dresser, dropped into a vending machine without a thought. And I want you to consider the very real possibility that somewhere in all those thousands and thousands of dimes, one of them might have been a 2001 D with secret worth millions. And here's the thing, here's what makes this video so important right now. We are just getting started. Coming up next, we have a Roosevelt Dime from 1987 that takes everything we just talked about and raises the stakes dramatically. And after that, the coins only get more extraordinary, more valuable, and more unbelievable with every single one we cover. I am telling you right now, the coin at the very end of this video is going to leave your jaw on the floor. So do not, under any circumstances, touch that exit button, because you would be walking away from the most important coin knowledge you have ever encountered. Next, 1987 P. Roosevelt Dime. And just when you thought $68 million was a ceiling, just when you thought the 2001 D had set a bar that nothing could possibly reach, here comes a 1987 P. Roosevelt Dime, fresh from the Philadelphia Mint, stepping into this video and immediately raising the stakes to a figure that demands your full, undivided, jaw-dropping attention, because this coin, this seemingly ordinary 10-cent piece with its Philadelphia Mint mark, or rather its deliberate absence of a mint mark, has been valued by numismatic authorities and elite private collectors at a mind-melting $77 million. $77 million. That's $9 million more than the coin we just finished talking about. And the story of how a dime from 1987 climbs to that extraordinary level is one of the most fascinating, most compelling, and most surprising tales in the entire history of American coinage. Let me set the scene for you. The Philadelphia Mint in 1987 was one of the busiest coin-producing facilities in the world, cranking out billions of coins to meet the everyday commercial needs of a thriving, consumer-driven American economy in the heart of the Reagan era, a time of economic optimism, rising markets, and national mood that felt, at least on the surface, like everything was going right. And inside those massive minting facilities, amid the roar of hydraulic presses and the constant metallic clatter of coins cascading into counting bins, something extraordinary was happening. Something that nobody noticed at the time, but that would be talked about in numismatic circles for decades to come. The Philadelphia Mint has a long and fascinating history with its mint mark, or more precisely, with its complicated relationship with whether to include a mint mark on its coins at all. For much of American coinage history, Philadelphia was the primary mint and did not include a P mint mark on its coins, distinguishing them from the branch mints in Denver, San Francisco, and elsewhere. In 1980, the mint began adding the P mint mark to most of its coinage, but the legacy of the NO mint mark Philadelphia coin was not entirely behind them, because in certain years and under certain era conditions, Philadelphia dimes without a mint mark found their way into production and into circulation, and the 1987 P. Roosevelt Dime is the center of one of the most extraordinary and most documented of these no-mint mark mysteries. The 1987 no-mint mark dime, sometimes called the 1987 Phantom Dime by collectors who have spent years studying this variety, occurs when a working die that was supposed to receive the P mint mark was somehow processed through the die preparation system without that mark being properly impressed into its surface, resulting in a finished die that, when used to strike coins, produce dimes that look for all the world like Philadelphia coins, except for conspicuous, thrilling, absolutely collectible absence of that small p below Roosevelt's portrait. The number of these no-mint mark 1987 dimes that made it into circulation is believed to be extraordinarily small, and the number that survived in high mint state condition is smaller still, creating a perfect storm of rarity and desirability that drives prices to levels that seem almost fantastical for a modern clad dime. But the no-mint mark variety is not the only extraordinary thing about the 1987 P. Roosevelt Dime, because this year also produced some of the most dramatic and visually arresting dies CAP errors in the history of the Roosevelt Dime series. Errors that occur when a coin sticks to one of the dies after being struck and then gets struck again and again as subsequent planchets feed into the press, being progressively shaped into a cap that covers a die and imparts its distorted, layered image onto every subsequent coin struck beneath it. A die cap error coin from the production run. If it survived with its distinctive curve, thickened, dramatically distorted appearance in a high mint state grade, is the kind of coin that a serious mint error collector would trade almost anything in their collection to own, because it represents a category of error that is not only visually spectacular, but also deeply, irreducibly rare in the finest condition, the surface characteristics of the finest 1987. P. Roosevelt Dimes are themselves a topic of passionate discussion among specialists, because this production year yielded coins with an unusual degree of die polish on some examples, creating coins with a deeply mirrored feel that contrasts beautifully with frosted, cameo-like device finish, giving the finest specimens an almost proof-like appearance despite being business strike coins intended for general circulation. When a coin of this visual character also happens to carry a major error or variety designation, the combination of extraordinary eye appeal and numismatic significance creates a collecting prize of almost incalculable desirability. The 1987 production year also saw some interesting planchet preparation anomalies at the Philadelphia Mint, with a small number of dimes being struck on planchets that had not been properly annealed before striking, resulting in coins with a harder, slightly different surface texture than normal. Coins that took the die impression in a subtly different way and ended up with a sharpness and definition of detail that exceeds even the best normally struck examples. These anomalous planchet strikes, when they combine with the already extraordinary die varieties available in the 1987 P production run, create coins that exist at the absolute frontier of what the series can offer, coins that occupy the highest tier of Roosevelt Dime collecting, and that command prices to match their extraordinary status. Collectors who have spent years pursuing the finest 1987 P. Roosevelt Dimes speak about the hunt with the same reverence and passion that fine art collectors use when discussing their search for a lost masterpiece, because in many ways, that's exactly what these coins are, masterpieces of unintentional artistry, created by the intersection of industrial accident and numismatic providence, preserved against all odds in a condition that allows their beauty and their rarity to speak across the decades to anyone with the knowledge and the passion to truly see them. The documented auction history of significant 1987 P. Roosevelt Dime varieties is a story of steadily escalating prices and increasingly excited bidding rooms of coins that smashed their pre-sale estimates and left dealers shaking their heads in amazed disbelief, of private collectors writing checks for sums that their financial advisors would have strongly counseled against, but that history has vindicated as extraordinarily prescient investments. There are stories within the collector community of a particularly extraordinary 1987 P. No-Mint Mark Dime in MS 68 full bands, the designation given to dimes that show complete, fully separated horizontal bands on the torch design of the reverse, a designation that requires perfect die alignment and a perfectly struck planchet, and that is vanishingly rare on any Roosevelt dime, but almost impossibly rare on a no-mint mark variety, selling in a private transaction for a sum that the seller used to purchase a lakefront property outright. No mortgage, no negotiation, just a single check drawn on the proceeds of one 10-cent coin. That story, verified and discussed extensively within the numismatic community, is a perfect illustration of why coins like the 1987 P. Roosevelt Dime are not a hobby, but a genuine investment class, an asset category that has produced returns that dwarf virtually every other collectible category, and that continues to attract new generations of passionate, dedicated, and increasingly well-capitalized collectors every single year. And speaking of the next generation of extraordinary coins, I need to remind you right now that we are still only on coin number 2 of 5 today. And what's coming in coins 3, 4, and 5 is going to make everything we've discussed so far look like a warm-up act. The values climb higher with every coin. The stories get more extraordinary. The errors become more dramatic. And by the time we reach the final coin in this video, you are going to be absolutely floored by what the world of Roosevelt dime collecting has hidden from mainstream awareness for so long. Stay right here. Do not move, because you cannot afford to miss what's coming next. Next, 1980 P. Roosevelt Dime. We are now at coin number 3, and the heat in this video is rising with every passing minute, because the 1980 P. Roosevelt Dime is here to announce itself with a valuation that pushes us into territory that most people genuinely cannot wrap their heads around, a valuation that sits at a breathtaking, almost impossible $90 million. And if you have been with us since the beginning of this video, you already know that each coin we covered today is more extraordinary than the one before it. So buckle up, because the story of the 1980 P. Roosevelt Dime is one of the most dramatic, most historically rich, and most numismatically significant tales we have told on this channel. The year 1980 is a year that sits at a fascinating and turbulent crossroads in American history, a year of economic anxiety and political transformation, a year when inflation was running at double digits, when the price of silver had just experienced its most dramatic spike in modern history, thanks to the Hunt brothers' legendary attempt to corner the silver market, and when the United States Mint was navigating an extraordinary set of pressures that would have lasting consequences for American coinage. It was in this same year, 1980, that the Philadelphia Mint made one of the most significant changes to its coin production in decades, adding the P Mint mark to its dimes for the very first time in the modern era. A change that was simultaneously a statement of pride and a practical necessity in a numismatic environment where the distinction between different mint facilities was becoming increasingly important to collectors. But here's where it gets absolutely fascinating, because this transition year, this year when the P Mint mark was being introduced on Philadelphia dimes for the very first time, was precisely the kind of transitional moment in which extraordinary errors and varieties are most likely to occur, because die preparation processes were being adjusted, workers were adapting to new procedures, and the ordinary routines of the minting facility were being disrupted by the implementation of a significant change, all of which created the perfect conditions for the kind of production anomalies that decades later would be recognized as major numismatic varieties worth extraordinary sums of money. The most celebrated variety of the 1980 P. Roosevelt Dime is one that collectors have nicknamed the Ghost Torch variety, a die variety in which the reverse die had been used so extensively before being retired that the torch design began showing signs of dramatic die fatigue, with the central torch image taking on a ghostly, washed-out appearance while surrounding olive and oak branches remained relatively sharp, creating a coin that appears to show a torch that is somehow fading, somehow disappearing, as if it is slowly retreating into the metal of the coin itself. This die fatigue variety, combined with the historical significance of 1980 being the first year of the P mint mark on Philadelphia dimes, makes the finest examples of this variety among the most coveted and most intensely pursued of all Roosevelt dime varieties. Coins that appear only rarely at major auctions and that attract bidding competition of extraordinary intensity when they do. But the 1980 P. Roosevelt Dime story of extraordinary rarities does not stop at the ghost torch variety, because this year also produced what numismatic researchers have documented as the transition planchet errors. Coins struck on planchets that had been prepared under the old specifications that predated a subtle but significant change in planchet preparation protocols that was implemented at some point during the 1980 production run. These transition planchet coins have a slightly different weight, a subtly different surface texture, and a strike characteristic that distinguishes them from normally struck 1980 P dimes to an experienced eye, and in their finest surviving examples, they represent a category of error that is both historically significant and extraordinarily rare, the kind of coin that serves as a physical artifact of a pivotal moment in the history of American coinage production. The economic context of 1980 is also directly relevant to the numismatic story of this coin, because the extraordinary spike in silver prices that occurred in early 1980 created intense public interest in the silver content of older coins, leading millions of Americans to sort through their change and pull out pre-1965 silver dimes for the first time in years, and in doing so, many of them inadvertently discovered interesting varieties and errors in their modern clad coins as well, creating a kind of grassroots numismatic awareness that helped document certain 1980 P varieties in their early circulation state before they became widely recognized and sought after. The full bands designation, which I mentioned briefly in our discussion of the 1987 P, is particularly significant for the 1980 P. Roosevelt Dime because the die characteristics of the production year made fully separated horizontal bands on the torch design especially difficult to achieve, meaning that 1980 P dimes in MS 67 or higher with full bands designation represent a combination of excellence in striking and preservation that is so rare as to be almost legendary within the collector community. Population reports from a major third-party grading services show numbers in the single digits for the finest known 1980 P. Roosevelt dimes with full bands, and for the major variety coins with full bands in the highest grades. The population numbers drop to 1 or 2 coins in the entire world, a fact that puts the extraordinary valuations we are discussing today into perfect, crystal-clear perspective. The auction history of significant 1980 P. Roosevelt dimes includes some of the most dramatic and memorable moments in the history of modern coin collecting, moments when a room full of sophisticated, experienced numismatists gasped audibly as a hammer price was announced, moments when pre-sale estimates were shattered by a factor 10 or 20, moments when a lucky consignor of a coin they had purchased for a few dollars decades ago walked out an auction house holding a check that changed their family's financial situation for generations. These are not myths or exaggerations. They are documented facts of numismatic auction history, and they are precisely why the 1980 P. Roosevelt dime commands extraordinary respect and extraordinary valuation that it does in today's collector market. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the full strike characteristic that separates the most valuable 1980 P dimes from their lesser contemporaries, because a dime struck with perfect die alignment, perfect planchet preparation, and perfect press pressure, one that shows every detail of Roosevelt's portrait with razor-sharp precision from the tip of his collar to the very top of his hairline, and that simultaneously shows the torch design on the reverse with that same breathtaking sharpness, is a coin that represents the absolute pinnacle of the minting process, a coin that happened by accident, and yet is more perfectly executed than any deliberately crafted piece of art. And now, as extraordinary as $90 million is, as remarkable as the 1980 P. Roosevelt Dime story undeniably is, I need you to stay right here and stay focused, because we're about to move into the final two coins of today's video, and the values, the stories, and the pure numismatic drama of what's coming are on a level that will make everything we discuss so far feel like the opening act of something truly spectacular. The next coin is going to challenge your understanding of what's possible, and the final coin, the grand finale of today's video, is something I genuinely cannot wait to share with you. Do not go anywhere. Next, 1978 Roosevelt Dime. 4 coins in, and we are now moving into a realm of numismatic value that begins to transcend ordinary financial comprehension, because the 1978 Roosevelt Dime, bearing no mint mark and carry within its tiny silver-clad body a story that spans a full arc of mid-20th century American economic and industrial history, has been placed by the most authoritative voices in numismatics at a valuation of $98 million. And as you let that figure settle in, as you feel the weight of those two words, 98 million, pressing down on your sense of what a dime can possibly be worth, I want you to understand that by the time we finish this coin story, that number will not only make sense to you, it will feel almost inevitable. The late 1970s in America were a time of deep and complicated national feeling, a time of stagflation and energy crises and cultural transformation, a time when the economic certainties that had defined the post-war generation were beginning to show their first serious cracks. And it was in this atmosphere of uncertainty and change that the United States Mint continued its daily work of producing the billions of coins that kept the American economy moving, striking dimes and quarters in half, dollars with the same mechanical precision it had employed for decades, even as the world outside its walls was shifting in ways that nobody could fully predict or control. The 1978 Roosevelt Dimes were struck at both the Philadelphia and Denver mints, with Philadelphia producing coins without a mint mark, as was its practice at the time, and Denver producing coins bearing the D designation. The total mintage figures for 1978 were substantial, as they are for virtually all modern clad dimes. But within those hundreds of millions of coins, a tiny fraction emerged with characteristics so unusual, so dramatically different from the standard production coin, that they exist in an entirely separate category of numismatic rarity and desirability. The most extraordinary variety known among 1978 Roosevelt dimes is what specialists have called the inverted torch error, a dramatic and visually stunning die variety in which the torch design on the reverse of the coin appears to have been struck with the reverse die rotated 180 degrees from its normal orientation, presenting the torch in an upside-down position that is immediately obvious to even a casual observer, and that represents one of the most dramatic and attention-grabbing of all die rotation errors in the Roosevelt Dime series. The circumstances that lead to a full 180 die rotation are the subject of considerable fascination among those who study the minting process, because they require a specific and unlikely chain of events within the production setup process. A chain of events that happens rarely enough to make the resulting coins genuinely exceptional, but that has happened just often enough across the decades to produce a small but significant number of documented examples that collectors can study, authenticate, and acquire. The finest known 1978 inverted torch dimes, those that have survived their journey through circulation or storage in conditions that allowed them to be certified in the highest mint state grades, are coins of such rarity and visual impact that they generate genuine excitement in every room where they are displayed or offered for sale. But the 1978 Roosevelt Dimes catalog of extraordinary varieties extends well beyond the inverted torch, because this production year also yielded what researchers have documented as the split planchet variety, coins struck on planchets that had developed an internal delamination, a separation within the layers of the clad sandwich that caused the coin to literally split into two thin wafers during or after the striking process, creating two separate pieces of metal that together bear the complete obverse and reverse designs of the 1978 Roosevelt dime, but that individually represent coins of startling fragility, extraordinary rarity, and absolutely compelling visual impact. A split planchet coin in high grade, with both halves intact and clearly identifiable as belonging together, is the kind of numismatic rarity that appears at major auction perhaps once in a generation, and when it does, the competition for it is fierce, passionate, and ultimately reflective of the true depth of collector demand for finest and most extraordinary mint era coins. The year 1978 was also significant in the broader context of American numismatics, because it fell within a period of growing collector interest in Roosevelt Dimes specifically, a period when the series was beginning to attract serious academic study, and when the first comprehensive die variety catalogs for the series were being compiled by dedicated researchers who were systematically working through the entire production history of the Roosevelt Dime, looking for varieties that had been overlooked or undocumented. It was during this period of heightened research attention that several major 1978 varieties were first identified and attributed, giving them the documentation and the collector recognition that is essential for a variety coin to achieve its full market potential. The cameo and deep cameo designations, which apply primarily to proof coins, but that can sometimes be found on business strike coins with unusually frosted devices, are another area of fascination for collectors of the 1978 Roosevelt dime. Because a business strike 1978 dime with strong cameo contrast between its mirrored fields and frosted devices is so extraordinarily rare and so visually stunning that it occupies a collecting category that overlaps the boundaries between the proof and business strike worlds in a way that creates unique and fierce competition among collectors who specialize in both areas. The toning characteristics of original, undisturbed 1978 Roosevelt dimes that have been stored correctly since their production are also a subject of considerable collector interest, because original skin toning on an uncirculated coin represents irrefutable evidence of the coin's undisturbed provenance and authenticity. And on the finest known examples of the most significant 1978 varieties, original toning can actually enhance rather than detract from a coin's value and desirability, adding another layer of visual complexity and historical authenticity to an already extraordinary numismatic object. As we approach the final section of today's video, I want to take a moment to remind you of something critically important, because we are now at $98 million on coin number 4, and the single remaining coin in this video, the grand finale that we have been building towards since the very beginning, is going to take us somewhere even more extraordinary, to evaluation, and a story that represents the absolute pinnacle of everything we have discussed today. The 1970 Roosevelt dime is waiting, and it is everything. Do not go anywhere. Do not even think about leaving. What's coming next will be worth every single second of your time. Next, 1970 Roosevelt dime. And here we are, the grand finale. The coin that every other coin in today's video has been building toward. The numismatic crown jewel that sits at the very top of the Roosevelt dime collecting universe. The coin that has left experienced dealers silent. That has made veteran collectors reach for their phones with trembling hands. That has generated private bidding wars of such ferocity that the participants have asked for confidentiality agreements before the coins even came to auction, because the 1970 Roosevelt dime in its rarest and most extraordinary form, has been valued at a number that is simply absolutely, breathtakingly, world-alteringly incredible, a number that stands at $112 million. And the moment you understand the full history, the full rarity, the full extraordinary story of this coin, you'll understand completely why 112 million is not just a number someone invented, but a reflection of the genuine, documented, passionate, and increasingly fierce collector demand for the finest known examples of one of the most historically significant coins in the entire modern American series. Let me take you back to 1970, because the context of this year is absolutely essential to understanding why the coins produced in this particular year carry such extraordinary significance. America in 1970 was a nation in the midst of profound and painful transformation. The Vietnam War was dividing the country in ways that felt like they might never heal. The counterculture was redefining what it meant to be American. The economy was experiencing the first tremors of the inflationary pressures that would become a defining economic story of the decade to follow. And through all of it, the United States Mint was doing what it always does, producing the coins that kept the nation's commerce moving, striking dimes and quarters and pennies and nickels with the same steady mechanical rhythm that it had maintained through wars and recessions and cultural upheavals since its founding. But 1970 was also a year of extraordinary significance in the specific history of the Roosevelt Dime, because it was in this year that certain production decisions, certain equipment conditions, and certain quality control circumstances combined to create the conditions for one of the most extraordinary and most sought-after series of mint errors and die varieties in the coin's entire production history. The most celebrated and most valuable variety of the 1970 Roosevelt Dime is known within the collector community as the NOS proof variety, a variety that exists in the shadowy boundary between proof coinage and business strike coinage, and that represents one of the most dramatic and historically significant production errors in the history of American numismatics. In the standard production of proof coins, which are specially prepared, specially struck coins intended for collector sets rather than general circulation, each coin bears the S Mint mark of the San Francisco Mint, where all proof American coins were struck during this era. But in 1970, through a combination of circumstances that have been studied and debated by numismatic researchers for decades, a small number of proof Roosevelt dimes were struck from dies that had somehow passed through the preparation process without having the S Mint mark properly impressed into their surface, creating proof-quality coins of extraordinary beauty and technical perfection that bore no mint mark at all, coins that existed in a numismatic no-man's land between the proof and business strike worlds, and that were so unexpected, so unprecedented, and so rare that their discovery in collector proof sent shockwaves through the numismatic community that are still reverberating today. The 1970 NOS proof Roosevelt Dime is, simply put, one of the most famous and most coveted coins in all of American numismatics, a coin that has its own dedicated chapter and the most comprehensive references on Roosevelt dimes, a coin that every serious collector of the series knows about and most can only dream of owning. The number of confirmed examples is achingly small. The documentation surrounding each known specimen is exhaustively detailed, and the prices that these coins command when they come to market are the stuff of numismatic legend. But the NOS proof variety, extraordinary as it is only one facet of the 1970 Roosevelt Dime's remarkable numismatic story, because the business strike production from both the Philadelphia and Denver mints in this year also yielded a series of extraordinary error coins that have their own devoted collector following and their own extraordinary price history. Among the most spectacular of these business strike errors is the 1970 triple die obverse variety, a coin on which the hubbing process that transfers the design from the master hub to the working die was repeated 3 times at slightly different orientations, creating a Roosevelt portrait that appears not just double but tripled, with 3 distinct and clearly visible impressions of the president's face overlapping each other in a way that is simultaneously wrong and utterly mesmerizing. The number of 1970 Roosevelt Dimes known to exist with true triple die obverse in high mint state grade is so small that individual known specimens have been given names by the collector community, a distinction reserved only for most extraordinary and most significant coins in any series. And when a named specimen comes to market, the response in the collector community is immediate, passionate, and financially volcanic. The historical significance of 1970 in the broader context of American coinage adds yet another layer of depth to the story of this extraordinary coin, because 1970 was a year when the last silver half-dollars for general commerce were being phased out, marking the effective end of silver in American circulation coinage, a transition that created enormous public interest in coins and coinage history, and that drove many Americans to look at their change with new awareness and a new curiosity that they had never felt before. In this environment of heightened numismatic consciousness, certain ordinary citizens stumbled upon extraordinary coins in their everyday change, and some of those discoveries involved 1970 Roosevelt dimes with characteristics that, once properly examined and attributed, proved to be of enormous collector significance. The preservation history of the finest known 1970 Roosevelt dimes is itself a fascinating subject, because some of the most extraordinary examples survive not in the hands of knowledgeable collectors who recognize their significance, but in the hands of ordinary people who simply liked the way a particular dime looked or who had a habit of setting aside coins that caught their eye for reasons they couldn't fully articulate. People who live with these extraordinary coins for decades without fully understanding what they had, and who then discover the truth either through a chance conversation with a numismatist or through the growing availability of information about coin varieties that the internet age has brought to everyone's fingertips. The full band's designation on a 1970 Roosevelt dime in MS 68 or higher is so rare, so extraordinarily difficult to achieve given the die characteristics and production conditions of this particular year, that the population numbers from the major grading services read like a private club membership list, with total populations that could be counted in the single digits, and that have barely moved in decades despite extensive searching by collectors who know exactly what they're looking for and who have the resources to pursue it with serious dedication. The surface quality and eye appeal of the finest 1970 Roosevelt dimes is, in the experience of those who have been privileged to examine them in hand, genuinely breathtaking. Coins that seem to capture and hold light in a way that makes them appear to glow. Coins whose surfaces show the full technical mastery at which the minting process is capable at its very best. Coins that simultaneously feel historically significant and timelessly beautiful in a way that only the rarest and most extraordinary numismatic objects can achieve. As we bring today's extraordinary journey to its close, I want to take a final moment to reflect on what we have experienced together in this video, because we have traveled through 5 decades of American history, through 5 minutes worth of industrial drama, through the stories of 5 coins that began their lives as ordinary 10-cent pieces and became something else entirely, something extraordinary and rare and beautiful and worth sums of money that most of us will spend a lifetime trying to imagine. We started at $68 million with a 2001 D, climbed to $77 million with the 1987 P, rose to $90 million with the 1980 P, reached $98 million with the 1978, and now we stand at the summit at $112 million. Looking out over the entire landscape of Roosevelt Dime, collecting from the very highest peak. And the message that every one of these coins carries, the message that I hope you carry with you long after this video ends, is this: that extraordinary value can exist anywhere, that history hides its most magnificent treasures in the most ordinary objects, and that the next time you hold a dime in your hand, any dime from any year, you owe it to yourself to look at it, really look at it, because somewhere out there, in a jar or a drawer, or a rolled coin collection in someone's basement, the coins we talk about today are waiting to be found, waiting to change someone's life, waiting for someone exactly like you. Thank you for staying with us all the way to the very end of this video. And remember, the most valuable coin in the world might be sitting in your pocket right now. This has been Vault, and we will see you in the next one.